Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third version or the third edition of the Reluctant Free Agent Voices of Experience. And I'm very excited to introduce you to I guess, former colleague of mine, Nick Tatar, who I've known for years. I don't even know when we first met each other, but I met him through our work in student affairs. And Nick has left higher education and is working in a totally different field. And I thought he would be someone who'd be really of great interest to a number of you who may have lost your jobs and are exploring different career options, maybe not in the same field, and also some of you who may be thinking about starting your own business. So I'm going to start that with the teaser and welcome, Nick. I'm so glad you're here tonight.
Hey, nice to see everybody and great to see you, Melinda.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I think for starters, if you could just tell people, I didn't tell them anything about what you're doing. So maybe start by telling people sort of what your job is and what that looks like, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So I worked in higher ed for about 25 years. My first job in higher ed was running an outdoor program down in Virginia at Washington and Lee University. And I had a wonderful run. Went to graduate school at Boston College, got my PhD from University of New Hampshire, and was a part of some wonderful experiments. I was at Olin College when the oldest students were sophomores and rising juniors, and there were no graduating students, and enjoyed working there for about 15 years. And through the course of time, things have evolved, and now I am a home improvement contractor or general contractor, and have been in this field for about 4 years, working full time, and it's been an incredible experience, and yeah, looking forward
Mhm.
to sharing more with you.
Yeah. So to me, and again, I am not in your situation, but when I think of moving to a different career, to me, the work that you're doing with home improvement and the different kind of licensing it requires and everything, to me, that just seems like a big shift from student affairs. Although maybe, and we can talk more about this later when we talk about transferable skills, maybe it's not so big of a shift, but like, what was that like to make that kind of a transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. There were parts of starting a new career that were really challenging, because I think, like many people, I had a lot of different interests, and
Mhm.
I think the challenge was for me was trying to think about this almost like this Venn diagram of, like,
Mm,
if one circle are these things that I like doing, they might be hobbies, they might be a side hustle, they were passions, they were skills that I thought that I had, and then I thought of this, like, this other circle of I don't know, things that I thought my community needed, or my
mm,
friends could benefit from help in, or the world in general just needed more of X, Y, or Z. And so when I was making
mm,
these lists and trying to, like a Venn diagram, like where they would start to overlap,
mhm,
I landed in this space of being like a handyman or helping people with their homes. And the things that I just found myself coming back to and being drawn to were, um, what are things that I could do full time? So not just part time or something that tickled my fancy from time to time, but what is something like day in and day out I could do? And then digging down into why that was going to be meaningful at the end of the day,
mm,
so that I would come home with the tank full, not half empty or
mm,
depleted. And
mhm,
the world of helping people with their homes, to me, when it started, it felt like this place where every day I could help someone. I could be independent. And at the end of the day, I could look back over what had been done, and feel good about it. And I
mm,
could look forward to the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. And I think the biggest challenge in going down that phase was I had no idea like what this looked like doing it
Yeah.
full time. Like I didn't understand the licensures that would be involved. I didn't understand the nuance of the different fields within construction. I had worked
Mhm.
in residence life for years, so of course had worked closely with facilities and understood the difference between an electrician and a plumber, and that students couldn't do certain things even though they thought they could, and and that kind of thing. And so one of my very first conversations was was really around networking and trying
Mm,
to develop an understanding. And so I started just talking to people, and it was like pulling on a thread, and
mm,
just kind of kept pulling on it until I had a better understanding of where things might go. And so my first job was with a larger company where I was exposed to a lot of different trades, and it was the advice that I got: start with a larger company
mhm,
and see what you think as you're interacting with all of these different trades, and see if
mhm,
one of them jumps out at you as something that you're particularly interested in.
mhm.
And that's sort of how it started. It started with some networking. It started with this exercise of creating lists and trying to refine, all these elements, and then it kind of landed in this space, which is really, yeah, it's really been a wonderful 4 years. It's been a great journey.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's funny, as you've been talking, I should be writing this down because I have like three different questions for you. And I think I'm going
Yeah,
to keep them in the order that you presented.
bring them,
So
bring them
I'm going to
on.
bring them on. Um, I'm fascinated about the idea. It's funny, earlier in my newsletter, I wrote about a Venn diagram myself. So you said Venn diagram, and I'm like, oh, you had me at Venn diagram. But it sounds like, even though you may have been in a moment of a lot of uncertainty, and I know that, like, when I left my job and just thinking about what am I going to do next, and I'm still thinking about it, like, there's a temptation to just jump into something. Do you know what I mean? Like, I need a job, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But it sounds like you took the time to be really thoughtful in this process. And so I appreciate that. Just because I've been going through my own reflection, and like, as you thought about all of that with, like, making the Venn diagrams and your lists of sort of things that you enjoy, sort of what do people need, like, how long was that process for you?
Yeah, I feel like this is like one of those classic moments where we glaze over how hard it was to go through
Yeah.
that, and we polish it up and make it look really
Mhm.
nice.
Yeah.
It wasn't as pretty a process maybe as I described it as. Yeah, there was a window there of being really unsure
Mhm.
about what I thought I knew about myself, and what I um about how successful I might be in a
Mhm.
in a different lane,
Mhm.
and learning a whole different language as I
Mhm.
started working side by side with men and women in the trades, and
Yeah.
how transferable would skills be. There
Mhm.
was just a lot of uncertainty, I think, on my end. And so I will say I had a great support system around me. I mean, from my wife to a counselor, and there were, even my kids. Like there were a lot of people around me that were, um, poked me forward when I needed a
Mhm.
little bit of a poke, but they were also always happy to sit down and be a soundboard. And
Mm. Mhm.
when I think about my conversations with people not in higher ed, but it's just in the field, John Fox and Mark Dorfman and some of these other folks that had been in the fields for 30, 40 years,
Mhm.
their willingness to share their knowledge and to talk about, the pros and the cons of working in the trades
Mhm.
they were just so eye-opening.
Mm.
And it reminded me a lot of what we talked to undergraduates about, when I would sit as a fly on a wall during a residence life training session,
Mhm.
or work with a postgraduate planning team, getting seniors ready to graduate. Um, you know, what's it like to be a good listener, when
Mm.
someone is
Mhm.
offering your advice? And, those little things where when there was silence in the room, that wasn't always an invitation to speak. It might be where John was actually taking a moment to think more about a question I had
Mm,
asked him. And if I just waited a little bit more, then more
mhm.
knowledge would start spewing out. Um, the uh, the pulling on the thread of
Mhm.
relationships, you would reach out to
Yeah.
somebody and see who they would direct you to someone else, and then maybe
Mhm.
that directs to a job opening where you can learn a little bit more. Um, and those moments, from higher ed to starting experiences to starting the job search were just invaluable. And I think some of
Yeah.
it was just being really humble and knowing that
Mm,
you got a lot to learn. And so, yeah, to your point, just being patient and
mhm.
listen, that was huge. I was trying to be the student that I hoped would have been sitting in front of me when I was a dean of students.
Mm. Well, it sounds like you were a good student in this process.
We got there. We got there. Yeah, I
There you
try. I
go.
tried not to. What do they say? Sometimes the doctor is sometimes the worst patient. I
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
I was trying hard not to be that person.
Yeah, well, we all do. So it sounds like then, with this Venn diagram, there was part of it was a reflective process on your own, and then like getting support from family and also talking to other people and bringing others in this process. And with pulling that thread with the network, I really love that idea because it feels like you start with, reaching out to people and then they lead you to someone else, like those 6 degrees of separation. Um, and so with that network, again, because it was a totally different industry, like, did you have connections already in that industry, like from your work in higher ed, where you worked with people in trades, or was it really starting over to create like a whole new network?
Yeah, that's a good question. This was a whole new network, so I was not looking to go into the trades in a larger organization, like say an Aramark.
Hmm.
This was, I think, a willingness to start on a much smaller scale, and I think there was also on my side a real comfort with starting at ground zero. All right, like I was absolutely willing to take a job with a minimum wage salary
Hmm.
and see what that would expose me to. So my very first job was with an organization called the Home Maintenance Organization, and their model basically was a subscription service. So if you had a home, you would pay them a subscription, and that subscription would get you a certain number of hours per month of someone coming to your house to help with
Mm.
jobs around the house. And some were small businesses, some were really wealthy families in the suburbs outside of in Metro West area. And so in the course of a week, I might be in an adult home working with people with disabilities and working to change shower heads and put a
Oh.
nonstick floor with
Mhm.
in a place where people were with walkers. And then the next day, I might be changing light bulbs in a full-sized underground basketball court, with a lift, and
Mhm.
working side by side on a home that had 12 different heating zones in it, so it was an opportunity to see a whole lot of things and
Yeah.
just right be a sponge and each day be ready to see something sort of new and not be
Mhm.
afraid to sort of roll up the sleeves and sort of have at it. And there was a moment, and it really stuck with one of my in my interview for that job. The job ended, or sorry, the course of the job was involved an interview going to a couple of job locations to see some different things so I could see
Mm.
the kind of work they would do. And there was a house that had a problem with some water collecting up on the ceiling. It was a cathedral ceiling.
Mm.
And they had a team in there and they had ripped open the ceiling and they could not find the leak. They had looked at the shingles, they couldn't, they had tried everything and they couldn't find anything. And I think, like anybody in student affairs, I went home and my brain was going like
Mm.
it was an open problem with real people on the other end, and I wanted to help them find some sort of closure. And I was hungry to try and help find the
Yeah.
solution. And so I went online and I started reading different articles about moisture in cathedral ceilings. And I stumbled across this one that said sometimes when there's an air conditioned vent and it's blowing cold air up towards the top of the cathedral ceiling, the humidity up there will condense and you'll
Mhm.
get this real moisture problem in the top of these cathedral ceilings, and it's more a ventilation problem and what happens to heat. And so the next morning on a whim, I sent a note to the guy I'd been interviewing with, and I said, I don't remember if there was a vent in the top of that cathedral ceiling, but I found this thread about, this one potential cause for crazy moisture that happens in this place. And he wrote back the next day and he said, Nick, that was it. You figured
No
it out.
way.
and and I
Oh, look at
felt
you. You're
like,
like the star of the day on like day
well,
two.
it was, and that was this moment of like problem solving
Yeah,
and
yeah.
helping people and these really interesting problems where you could have a lot of smart people sitting around the room
Mhm,
trying to troubleshoot something. And
mhm,
it felt like one of like many moments early on
mm,
where I realized I could really find my way into a space where I would be with like-minded people, people that wanted to help other people
mhm.
solve problems,
Yeah,
and these were real problems, right? This was someone's home,
yeah.
and they were having water issues, and it was really frustrating people and it was like in student affairs when you're trying different keys
Mhm.
in a door to try and unlock a problem, and then someone presents a key and it opens the door and everybody's like, Melinda, you did it.
Yes.
I don't know what you just said, but it worked. And so that moment, I think, for me
Yeah.
was it was very similar to higher ed in many ways,
Mhm,
but it was also radically different.
mhm.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was a more straightforward space in some ways. As complicated as solving Title IX related problems had become, or
Mm,
navigating on-campus politics. This was maybe a different kind of problem, but wicked complicated. But
mhm.
at the end of the day, to me and where I was, it really resonated in the in a maybe in some ways a simpler, more straightforward way, and one where I could see day in and day out, I could potentially come home with these little victories.
Yeah.
And that was maybe it was good for me and my self-confidence, and I
Mhm.
sort of knew that I needed that. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I think it's part of what makes the job easy or to wake up in the morning and go to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, like, in just listening to this example with the ceiling and the moisture
Mm.
and thinking about our work in higher education and student affairs specifically, that I could already hear some transferable skills, like that problem solving, like every day, like in higher ed, you're solving problems because things just come up and it's like, oh, we got to figure out how to make this work. But also that I think it's more of a personality quality of being curious that,
Hmm.
whether you're listening to a student and being curious about them and sort of what they need, or being curious about that moisture issue and really like, what could, you went home and you were curious enough and wanting to solve the problem that you looked into it as opposed to being like, yeah, I wonder about that. And then stop there. So that curiosity, um, seemed to be driving you as well. What other types of skills that you see as transferable from like a higher ed to home improvement?
Yeah, honestly, I think some of the things that have allowed me to be successful over the last 4 years. So I went from, sticking my toe in the pond, working part time, taking
Mhm,
any job that someone was willing to throw my way,
mhm,
to now being full time and having a team of three people. And so now
mhm.
there are three of us that I keep busy all the time, right?
Yeah.
And the I think what allowed me that growth to happen in some ways was benefiting directly from skills in higher ed.
Mhm,
So many of the problems that we see around the home, people they're just not sure what's going on, and so
mhm,
having someone step into the room, no matter how bad things are going, is calm and
mhm,
just willing to de-escalate. From the moment you walk in the door, you're not being kerosene and making things worse,
Mhm.
somehow. People really appreciating, attention to detail and thoughtfulness.
Mm.
There's a lot of quirky construction that's happened through the years, and I don't know that the explosion of new housing growth, where houses are torn down and then they're rebuilt in 6 months, and it went
Yeah.
from a 1,500 square foot house to 6,000 square feet. They're many times they're done well, but many times they are not. They are,
Mm.
like, you can't even believe like how the how shoddy sometimes the work is. And so when someone sees another person really invested in their well-being and looking to take care of their house in the same way that you would take care of your own house.
Yeah.
I think of those conversations I had where parents, and they would say, part of what allowed me to leave on that first day of orientation was seeing residence life staff and student affairs staff and orientation staff that were
Mhm.
so dedicated to my kid. Like, I could tell right
Mhm.
away that they were invested and that my kid had landed in the right place. And I,
Mhm.
I think that skill set for a homeowner, when the homeowner can turn around and see their spouse and they're like, we got the right people in here. Like,
Yeah.
they're going to fix this. They're going to fix it right. And there's not going to be any tricks, rolled
Mhm.
out. There's not going to be what gets joked as like the tailgate warranty, where
Mm.
my fix is only as good as long as you can see the tailgate on my pickup truck. And
I
once
never heard of that. That's kind of scary. Yes.
you're right. And so that, right, the number of jobs where you kind of come out on the back end of it, and that
Mm.
you've left the place in a better place than where it started.
Yeah.
People really appreciate. And so the patient side of it is, I think, something that's a little bit unique to, when you're starting your own business. You have this, I think there's a moment about a year into the job where you have to decide if you're going to, and maybe less, where you're going to aggressively advertise what you do and try and,
Mhm.
pull people out, that you've never met before, to sign up for your business. Or
Mhm.
can you be patient enough and let the networking work for you?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so I I think I had, in some ways, had the luxury of being patient, and
Mm.
the referral network has really panned out wonderfully. In the same way, like when you meet a great counselor or mental health
Mhm.
professional, right? It doesn't take long to understand, that they're soon full, right? They
Yeah.
can't take any more referrals because word
Mhm.
spreads really fast. And I would say, by about year two of working out here, my plate was full and I needed to bring in
Mm.
another person.
Yeah.
And then by year three, the plate was full again, and we needed to bring in a
Mhm.
third person. And it was that confidence in doing good work, and that people will be excited to talk about the good work that you've done for them.
Mhm.
It has really borne some fruit. And sometimes people will say, "Oh, can we?" Someone posted something interesting on Facebook. Can I put your name on there? And I would say, like, no, 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 no. Please, if you have a friend that needs help, like, that's
Mhm.
great. And we're plenty busy, and I would much rather work for folks that, there are relationships,
Mhm.
involved, and then we'll both benefit from those relationships in the
Mm.
long term.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, it's funny. I told you this when I talked to you the other day. I said, the minute I told my husband about you, he's like, "Oh, we should get him over to our house." And I think there is that, like, there's definitely a need there.
yeah,
Um, but but I appreciate that, going back to that idea when you were sort of making a list of stuff, and the idea of meaning, and there's meaning making in lots of different types of careers. And I think, in shifting our mindset, if we're thinking about a career change, it's sort of what's purposeful to us, and if it's important to us to bring meaning to others, like looking at that in lots of different ways. And it's clear
yeah.
that this has met that need both for yourself and for others. One thing I'm thinking of is you started off working for, you said, a large company or a large group. And then you've obviously gotten your independent license and you've moved out on your own and now you've hired several people. And to me, there just seems like a lot with that. So, like working in higher ed, like I'm working for a company that, you know, they take out my taxes. I don't have to do that myself. And I'm not actively billing people for the work that I'm doing. And, there's, well, with building, there's a whole different sense. I guess that's where the license comes in, that you have to know what you're doing. But like as you think of making the shift from always working for someone as opposed to having your own business, what's the learning curve on that? I mean, to me, that's something that sort of scares me. And when I think about
Yeah.
going out and doing something independently, like there's this whole other level of knowledge that I haven't had to know.
Yeah. I, I there's an analogy I sometimes use with people. In the winter, I make maple syrup, tapping maple trees all around our neighborhood, and
Mm,
we work with the neighbors, and they're all excited to collect the sap and then make the syrup. And so it feels like there are these two buckets and that's all that's required for making syrup. You collect the
yeah.
sap, and then you boil it down, and you have syrup. And the third rail that nobody talks about in the maple syrup industry is the cleanup, and like
Mm,
how messy and how much time it spends like cleaning it all up. And the
mm,
the third rail of running a small business is the taxes and the invoices
mhm,
and keeping track of receipts. And I have an 18-year-old son who he enters receipts in for me, and he
mm.
spends hours every week just entering receipts and categorizing them so that
Nice.
it comes out on bills. And so there's like it I found a way to get through that part of it.
Mhm,
But running a business is not a trivial thing, and
mhm.
it's definitely, I mean, you're wise to be thinking about it because it's like this hidden rail that nobody
Yeah,
wants to talk about,
yeah.
and I did get some really good advice, from when I was talking to um, through the networking angle of people who were own small businesses.
Mhm,
There were definitely two camps. There were folks that said, I tried and I couldn't figure out how to make it work. Like
yeah.
it was not a strength of mine to write those invoices out every day, record all those receipts and
Mhm,
get those things out, follow up on time. I couldn't do it. And again, a lot of trades guys are happy to go out on their own until they hit,
yeah.
the paperwork side of it, the hidden third
Mhm,
rail. And then those that were successful, they gave me little tips along the way. One of them early on said, pay for a subscription to QuickBooks. And in
mm,
QuickBooks, you can record your receipts, you can do your invoices. If you want to hire an accountant to do your taxes, they can extract all of that information right out of QuickBooks,
mm,
and it's a tool that, um, while it might be used by large businesses, it's great for a small business.
mm,
And this came from a carpenter that I really respected. And gosh, and sure enough, like I can't say enough about that one
mm,
little software program and how big a role it plays day in and day out as I'm
mm,
sending invoices or keeping track of receipts or
mhm,
mileage on a car. It's I use it all the time. Similarly, when I was going to get my license to become a general contractor, um, I looked online, and there were, like a lot of industries, there were all of these online, places you could go get books and you could take online lessons. And I tried one or two of them to try and orient myself to what it would take to get ready to take an exam. And I could tell that they weren't going to cut it. Like they were
mm,
not going to get
mhm.
me ready, right? It
Yeah.
was just it was a total marketing scheme, almost kind of predatory in some ways. And
Mm,
I knew that I needed to find a better resource. And so I was working in Cambridge. I take care of some really old, beautiful Victorian homes in Cambridge, and I was working on one, and a guy there, and I started talking about the licensure, and he said, "Oh, you ought to, take this class with Mass Code Prep, and there's a faculty member there from Wentworth, and there's
mhm,
um, a building contractor from Cambridge, and they're amazing. They meet once a week at
mm,
night. They'll give you homework, and they will get you ready for this final exam." And it was I don't know, maybe it was about $1,500 for the class and
Mhm.
all of the books. But he was right. Like
Mhm.
it was all about finding the right teacher,
Yeah.
and avoiding some of the sort of online sort of scammers and sort of
Mhm.
for-profit sort of models that were out there. And not that this team wasn't making money off of what they were doing, but they were really deeply invested, and and it made all the difference in the world.
Mhm.
It was not an easy test to take. I failed it the first time that I took, which is not uncommon.
Mhm.
Um, I passed it my second time, and I could not have done it without that conversation, with David, who connected me to Peter, at Mass Code
Yeah.
Prep. And like suddenly I was really ready for that exam. And I will say to to having earned a PhD and now taken that what's called the unrestricted construction supervisor's license, that thing was not easy. Like
Mm.
that was really hard. And it took a lot, it took a lot of work. So
Yeah.
I really have a lot of respect for people that pass those exams, and the
Yeah.
amount of work that goes in there. As I mean, you really have to be book smart with these
Mhm.
things, with some of
Yeah.
those licenses. And I'm not sure I appreciated that until I was knee deep into it.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's on the front end, it's easy to get into the profession. For $200, you can become a licensed home improvement contractor, which
Mhm.
basically means you're registered with the state and you told them that you're going to work on homes. And then on the back end, you can go all the way up, but basically to become what's my clients would call a general contractor.
Mhm.
And that path, it's 3 years of work, and you have to pass that exam, and the exam is not easy.
Mm.
But it's great once you pass it. A lot of opportunity is in front of you, and it's well worth keeping the license up once you have it.
Yeah.
But definitely part of the learning process. So a lot of stuff I didn't know, when I first started this, and as I got deeper into
Mhm.
understanding what was going to allow me to be successful independently. In the same way that, like, as a young professional, I had no idea how important having a master's degree was going to be to becoming an assistant or an associate dean.
Mhm.
And I had no idea that a PhD was, the glass ceiling to becoming an AVP or a dean of students,
Mhm.
right? I didn't understand those things early on. But once you're
Yeah.
in the field for a little while, you realize there are a couple of things that you've
Mhm.
gotta you have to hurdles you have to clear, to
Mhm.
become, an independent business person. And you know, yeah, you definitely gotta have an appetite for managing some paperwork. There's just no
Mhm.
way around it. You
Yeah.
you can't shy away from the licensure stuff. Like,
Mhm.
it's real, and
Yeah.
some of it is not easy, and it really means going back to school, if you
Mhm.
will. And I think the third is really not being afraid to network with your colleagues to figure
Mhm.
out how to be most efficient at those things, so that you don't repeat the same mistakes, over and
Mhm.
over. Talk to people and let them guide you through some of those things, and you'll get where you want to be much more quickly.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, I mean, as you've been talking, I've been thinking about how you got from like point A to point Z, I guess, from where you are now. And it sounds like you thought, okay, this is something I'm interested in. So you went out and got a job where you could learn a little bit more and see what specifically you'd be more interested in. So getting a little more depth when you had that job and tried out different things. And then when you decided you were all in, again, using your network where you figured out how you could connect with someone for classes to learn what you needed to for the licensing exam. And I also hear that you sort of paid attention to that gut, like when you saw these online classes being like, I don't think these are going to get me what I want. And so really talking that through. I appreciate that piece because I think, especially now, there's so much out there where it's like,
Oh my
oh, you could
God.
get this in 30 days. And how do we know? Like if you're entering a new field, how do you know that that's not legit? It might be, but maybe not. And so I love that you paid attention to your gut because sometimes we dismiss that and just think, oh, whatever. So I appreciate that as well. And then I'm also hearing knowing the tools of the trade. And even though your tools may involve like saws and stuff like that. There's also the QuickBooks, which for a business is very important. And so it sounds like there's different layers to it, which have evolved over time as you started off learning by working in the field and talking to people. And then as you started to move out on your own, again, using that network and then looking at the tools and that it's been an ongoing process to where like you didn't say this I want to do and 6 months later you were ready. So part of it, again, going back to that patience, you put thought into the beginning, but also you were patient because it took time to get where you're at now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that, you know, there, some wonderful organizations in higher ed like NASPA and their journals, Chronicle of Higher Ed, right?
Mhm.
There's all this great information I think that exists for people in higher ed and student affairs, and that same information exists, in these trade circles. And
Mm,
it just, you just have to be willing to find out where those new spaces are.
mhm. Yep.
Where's the place where these people will go to go talk about this thing, and how do I find my way into that room
Yeah.
to start talking with those people? And it's I you know and some of it really challenges your comfort zones, right?
Mhm.
And who you're interacting with. And I think in the world of trades, it is an incredibly diverse workforce, right? Of
Mm, mhm.
different languages and cultures, and there's a whole different world of stereotypes about, what groups of people do what trade and who does the best at this, or, which neighborhood in Boston, looks for these folks or not those folks, and sort of navigating, some very different spaces and groups
Mm,
of people. And, if there's something I think that's helpful coming out of the student affairs profession, it's, being very comfortable working with people that are, quote unquote different, right? And
mhm.
if we've spent a lot of time, I think, training through the years on, listening to your gut, also listening when not to talk and when to
Mhm.
listen, and when to try and recognize when you might be making an assumption or a stereotype that might get in the way of you hearing something.
Mhm.
Um, how to see past some of that stuff so that you can get where you want to be. And sometimes the guy that's on the other side of the contractor desk, taking the orders, might not be the person you want to see walking down the street on not well lit night on a
Mm,
Saturday night, right? And you'd be like, your spidey senses kind of going
mhm.
off, and sort of recognizing in this environment that actually that guy might be your best resource. And
Mhm.
if the two of you are close, like, he's actually going to be the one that's going to get you to the finish line. Like,
Mm.
he's the guy. Like, that's the guy you need
Uh-huh.
to talk to, right? He's been in this trade for 30 years, and if you can't if he doesn't know who can do the stitching on the leather door, then it doesn't exist, right? I don't know that I
Mm.
can find it, but that guy could find, might know who it
Yeah.
is. And or talking to a plumber that uh can talk about the wonky construction that happened in the 1980s. And you're like, I'm in this house where the sink is doing this really weird thing. And, and he'll say, oh, that's when these like ceramic valves were being used on kitchen faucets.
Mm.
And like, don't get me started about these problems. And you're like,
Mhm.
whoa, like now I understand, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Well,
you
it's
know,
like you have these pockets of expertise in a different field, and sort of as you get into the field, you're learning like, oh, this is the go-to person if I want an expert in this area. And it sounds like how it's communicated is just different from what you knew in higher ed. It's just a different way to find, like I don't know, a different labyrinth you're working in, or I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, absolutely. And again, a labyrinth that's so different in how it presents that right, you have to think in some different ways,
Mhm.
and, because the people that I'm working with, and many of they don't look like, they don't sound like, they
Mhm.
don't talk about their experiences in quite the same way
Mhm.
what I saw, for 25 years in higher ed.
Yeah.
But once you can kind of see through some of that,
Mhm.
then it's like eyes wide open, right? And suddenly, like Melinda, I need to call Melinda. She's the
Yeah.
one,
Yeah. And
who
that
can
takes
help me.
time.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Building a whole new network, right? It
Yeah.
takes
Yeah.
time, and when you do it well, it's invaluable, right? It's
Mm.
part of your success, right? Is that
Yeah.
network that you build.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Nick, I'm glad you're part of my network.
Yeah.
And you joke, but
Back
I
at
may
you.
someday be calling you. Well, we're not getting to the right height here, but yes. Um, any other, not that you, I mean, there's just tons of tips here. So I'm not going to ask if there's any more tips unless there's something you really wanted to share that you haven't had a chance to share yet.
No, I think the only thing that I often tell people is that the skill set in student affairs I will serve you well. All right. And
Mm,
it's just it there's such great universal tools. Being a good listener and being curious and being a problem solver.
mhm,
Nell Noddings, the philosopher, used to talk about that difference of caring for someone or caring about someone.
mm,
And if you really care for someone, like it's hard to close this loop because you need to see that you've solved the problem. And if you haven't, you need to adjust, what you thought was the fix and try something else. And if, when you really care for the people in your job, a good night's sleep comes when you feel like you've really solved it and you can see it
mm,
in the person you've been working with. Like you can see that they're in a really good place. And
mm,
that that feeling, I think, is one that really makes my job really rewarding, and
mhm.
it's one that I think made my best days in student affairs the best days. Right?
No.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're obviously still in the business of caring.
yeah,
You
not going
clearly are.
anywhere.
That's one thing that hasn't changed, which is nice. Like,
Yeah.
there's a saying, wherever you go, you bring yourself, and you're clearly doing that in your work now. So thank you. And, if someone sees this and they're like, I've been thinking about starting my own business and I have a question for Nick, would it be okay if they reached out to you? I'm not asking for your personal cell phone number. Well, I have it, but I won't share it. But if they message you like on LinkedIn, would that be okay?
Yeah, or they can work through you as well.
Okay.
Either
Would
one
that
is
be the best
fine.
way for them to reach out to me? Okay.
Yeah, like I'm connected on LinkedIn, but not in the same way as like text messaging with my
Yeah.
clients. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that makes sense. Okay. So people know how to reach me because if you found this here, you've got my info and you can message me and then I will get your message to Nick. And we'll go from there. So thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you so much for all of this. I've learned a lot in this process. And I'm sure other people have as well. So I really appreciate that. And I think you've provided some much needed insight to people who may right now be looking at different options. So thank you so much, Nick.
you're welcome. And it was great reconnecting, Melissa.
Yeah, definitely. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you.